Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight we're having a special meeting with Hugh Ross, who's been in the Toronto area. At various events he's speaking about. If you should have all gotten an email, if you're all on my email list. So Hugh is going to give an update on some things that are happening at Reasons to Believe. And then the rest of the evening, we can just ask him any old question we want. So, welcome. And you can sit here and you'll be recorded. If you need a whiteboard to explain anything, it's over there.
Yeah, I'm not gonna need a whiteboard. Because I've limited my time to just a few minutes anyway, so. But that's good to be back here. I got my PhD at the University of Toronto. Can't hear? Okay. Let me okay, let me try to speak a little louder, but there's a limit to, I'm old enough now. I can't yell for a whole hour. So if I need a microphone, let's see if we can get one, but don't think we're set up for that. But yeah, this brings back memories because back in the 60s and 70s, I got my PhD in astronomy at the University of Toronto, not on this campus. Like this is the first time I've been on the Mississauga campus. Back when I was at the downtown campus on St. George. This was called Arundel. We had Scarborough, Arundel, the downtown campus. I think they now call this Mississauga.
No, this is
Still called Arundel?
No, but we're not on this on the U of T Mississauga campus.
we're just
We're in a total different location.
Only different location, sorry. Okay. That's the conference I'm participating in that's on that campus, yes.
this is Thornhill.
Thornhill, got it. Yeah, and this area is way more populous than it was when I was here. I remember when Richmond Hill had 30,000 people and Markham had just 25,000. What I learned today is that they put the two communities together, 700,000 people. So yeah, Toronto is not the same as it used to be. So, but let me give you an update on what's happening with Reasons to Believe. Reasons to Believe USA got founded in 1985 and officially got its non-profit status in 86. And it was about 28 years ago, we founded Reasons to Believe Canada. So Reasons to Believe Canada is a separate organization with respect to Reasons to Believe USA. But what's happened in the past year is we've also established Reasons to Believe Asia-Pacific. It's headquartered in India, but their goal is to have a Reasons to Believe influence that stretches from Pakistan to Japan. And they're already moving into countries like Bhutan and Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and moving into Singapore, Hong Kong. In fact, Fuzz Rana and I will be visiting India in October. And that organization has done phenomenally well. And just like in 1 year, they got to speak personally to 48,000 people. So that's amazing how far the dollar goes in India. I mean, they needed a subsidy from us of $10,000 a month. Well, that bought them a staff of 3 scientists, plus support staff, plus the rent for a building. I mean, there's no way you could get that in Canada or the US for that kind of money. But you're able to do it in India. And just a few months ago, we launched Reasons to Believe Africa. That's headquartered in Johannesburg. And it's headed up by a fellow I've known since 1983. He's an astrophysicist at the University of Witwatersrand, David Block.
Yes.
And he regularly speaks to audiences of 5,000 to 10,000 people. But he and his wife, and they now have a team of scientists, and that's Reasons to Believe Africa. We've gotten requests to establish Reasons to Believe Latin America, Reasons to Believe Eastern Europe, Reasons to Believe Western Europe. We don't have the financial resources to do that, but we've got people in place that are waiting for us to basically make that a reality. So that's probably been the biggest change at Reasons to Believe. And we've had a scholar community, and our scholar community are basically people with doctoral degrees who keep their jobs as scholars in different universities, research firms, and they volunteer for us to the degree that they're able. And we set it up so that they can participate at whatever level they want, because after all, sometimes scholars get busy. They're not able to participate, but then they have those moments when they can really do something significant. So, and our goal is to build a scholar community worldwide of 1,000 people with doctoral degrees. And the requirement is to become part of our scholar community. That scholar community is for the purpose of training these scholars to reach their peers, not just their undergraduate students, not just their support staff, but reach their peers. Because our goal is if we can get people at that level evangelizing their peers, bringing their peers to faith in Christ, it's going to have a dramatic trickle-down effect throughout all of society. And you say, well, how many do you have now? George here can probably give you an update. Last time I heard it was 180, but he told me we got, 20 new applicants. So we could soon be up to 200. And hey, I just had dinner with someone. I mean, you're a great candidate. We need to recruit you. And I'm sure there's a few others of you here or you know of people. And the board came to me, the Reasons to Believe USA board came to me and says, Hugh, we really need to get Reasons to Believe Canada in the same status as Reasons to Believe Asia-Pacific and Reasons to Believe Africa. Because those organizations have not been around. They've only been around for, well, Asia-Pacific 1 year, Reasons to Believe Africa 3 months. And yet both of those organizations have dedicated staff scholars that are speaking publicly. And they're raising financial resources within their countries to grow the organization. And I know ministry is more expensive here in Canada than it is in Africa or it is in Asia Pacific, but also the resources are better. You know, Canadians have got the capability of financially supporting it. But at our last Reasons to Believe USA meeting, they said, Hugh, you're a Canadian. Do what you can to get Reasons to Believe Canada into the same position that Reasons to Believe Asia Pacific is and Reasons to Believe Africa, which is why we're aggressively recruiting people with doctoral degrees across Canada. I was in Vancouver 2 months ago, and I think we got 3 there that we could potentially recruit. I know there's resources here in Toronto. We have somebody in the Hamilton area that's already part of our community. And I think with that, we could use that pool of people who are Christians, scholars, who are being equipped to reach their peers for Christ, that should attract the necessary Canadian financial resources to actually make this a go. So that's the kind of the objective that the board that I serve has put on me. It's one reason why they said, we want you to transfer the presidency of Reasons to Believe to Fuzz Rana, because we want you to be free to do these kinds of things. So that's kind of an update of what's happening with Reasons to Believe. All of our staff scholars are writing books. I think what's fun is that we now have books coming out from people in our scholar community. There's a book coming out within a few months by medical researchers talking about the marvel of the design of the human body. And the publisher, so British publisher, is going to be bringing that book out. I wrote an introductory chapter for that book, and they've come back and said, we want another book from these scholars. So there's going to be book 2 coming out, and I'm going to be contributing 2 chapters in that book. And so I think this is what we're now seeing, books come out. And if you're part of our monthly scholar program, we actually give away books to people who commit to support Reasons to Believe on a monthly basis. And so I think we've already given away 2 books that have been written, not by our staff scholars, but by people in our scholar community. And we're looking forward to having at least twice as many books coming out from Reasons to Believe as what you've seen in the past decade on a per annum basis. And so we're restructuring Reasons to Believe USA to enable a much more aggressive publishing effort than we have so far. And also what we're doing is trying to take the material that our scholars produce. And I realize a lot of the blogs that we make available on our website and the books we write, they're not at a grade 8 level. They're more like a grade 16 level. And so we're looking to say, how can we take the material? By the way, we have to produce material at the top academic level. That's how you get the credibility. If you can't persuade your neighborhood engineer or scientist that is credible, nobody's going to read it. So it's important that we have material that communicates at that level. But we also have a mandate to take that same material and put it out at a grade 8 level. Now, that's probably not necessary in Canada, but the average reading level of Americans in their adult years is grade 8. My experience with Canada, grade 10, maybe grade 11, but with Americans, it's got to be grade 8. And so how are we pulling that off? Well, we're bringing in people that are skilled at communicating to that level, but are able to work with those scholars to make sure that they don't butcher the science or butcher the theology. So that's a difficulty. But one thing that's been personally exciting for me is I take some of my articles that are like 2,000 words and at a grade 18 level, not grade 16, but grade 18, and working with artificial intelligence to bring it out at a grade 7 level. And it's tricky because you can't just throw it all into Chat GPT, because if you do, it takes tangents. I mean, you're basically, it's taking in the database of the entire World Wide Web, but it doesn't always, it's going to reflect the philosophical bias of the web, and it's not going to reflect the scientific literature because that's not part of the database. And so I learned through experimentation, the best way is to do it in chunks. Okay, Chat GPT, take what I got here and take it from grade 18 to grade 15. And I only give it 2 or 3 paragraphs at a time. If I give it my whole document, it's going to go off on a tangent. It's going to butcher the science. But if I give it just small paragraphs and take it from grade 18 to grade 15, and grade 15 to grade 13, grade 13 to grade 11, grade 11 to grade 9, grade 8, and get it up to grade 7. You might think that's a long, involved process, but if you do it like that, and there's papers that have been published, you get the best results from artificial intelligence where you partner the AI with a top scholar in that discipline. And you involve the scholar at the beginning and turn it over to AI at the end. And there's an ideal point where you turn it over to AI. But I've worked both with human writers that are skilled at communicating to a grade 8 audience, and I've worked with AI. My partnership with AI takes about 1/8 the time that it takes to partner with a human. And we're actually saying maybe we need to partner with AI plus a human who's good at communicating to that level. We haven't done that experiment yet. But my whole point is, we're living in a day and an age where we've got technology we've never had before. And right now, these artificial intelligence platforms are free. So it's like we're taking advantage of it while it's free, because we know it's not going to be long before they start charging. And basically what they're doing is that when I use artificial intelligence, I have to sign off that they can use my responses to the artificial intelligence. Well, you know what they're doing. They're using people like me to make the artificial intelligence better. And when it gets to a certain level, that's when they're gonna start charging money. But right now it's free, so we're taking advantage of the free. So that's a quick background on what we're doing at the Reasons to Believe. I do want to share that I got George Haraxon here. He's the fellow that's heading up our staff team on our scholar community. If you know anybody that you think would be good in our scholar community, please let George know. That's important because I'll contact a scientist and say, hey, we have this scholar. Oh, I'm really interested. Sign me up. But they're busy. They don't follow through. We need people like you and George to say, hey, here's his email address. And we can contact them and get things going. And incidentally, it's on our website. You can go to our reasons.org website, put in scholar community, it'll pop up and tell you everything about the community. But my experience is these scholars are busy people. They need some little guidance, like working with artificial intelligence. You need to partner to get them involved. I don't know about you, George, but what I've discovered is once they get involved, they love it. But the trick is actually getting them to that point. So we're counting on you to help us with that, because we think the worldwide Christian community will be different when we've got 1,000 doctoral level scholars that are actively bringing their peers to faith in Jesus Christ. And I think Reasons to Believe is the one organization that can pull it off. But we're going to need prayer, because just 3 years ago, we had 30 in the scholar community. We're trying to get to 1,000. We're now close to 200, but I keep telling George, eventually we're going to reach a tipping point. Because one of the things I've known in working with scientists at Caltech and the University of Toronto, they're not going to get involved until they see a critical mass. But once they see that critical mass, they all jump in. I'm not sure what that critical mass is. I've been telling George and Fuzz and the others, I think it's somewhere around 300. Once you've got 300 scholars actively involved, people realize, oh, this is a community. I'm not going to be isolated. It's one thing to ignore 10 people. It's difficult to ignore 300. And so I believe when it reaches somewhere around that number, we're going to be flooded with applicants. Because I know there's a lot of evangelical scholars out there, but they don't want to expose themselves unless they're with a strong community. So those are some things you can pray for us about. But I'm primarily here to answer questions that you might have on science, theology, philosophy. And Al here in the front row, he was part of my paradoxes class in Southern California. But being a Canadian, and incidentally, what I loved about Al coming to our class, he was a Hollywood comedian. So I basically said, Al, every time you already know, okay. So I told Al, you're welcome to participate in the paradoxes class, but please bring a clean joke every time you come. And so we'd always start the class with a joke from now. And he delivered, it was great. Then he came to me and said, hey, I can take as many courses as I want at York for free, now that I'm 60 years of age. So he said goodbye to us and headed off here to Toronto. But hey, it's been wonderful to see him here in person. So
Thank you.
and Al, you were a blessing to our paradoxes class.
Me?
Oh, yeah.
No. How can I be a blessing?
Well, you've been gone for quite a while, but people in the class still talk about you.
Really?
Yeah.
Good
really.
stuff?
Good stuff, yeah. They remember your jokes.
Can I just quickly, what happened to Al? Remember Al, the real stiff skeptic?
Yeah, Al Lopez.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in his late 80s now, but still really good shape. His wife passed away from dementia, and he took good care of her. And he told me just a few weeks ago, I've always announced myself as a class atheist, but I want to tell you, my wife's last year, I prayed with her, and she really wanted that prayer, and the prayer did something to me. And what I noticed about Al, you remember Al?
Oh, yeah.
He was very caustic.
Yeah.
Very aggressive in trying to refute us Christians in the class. His demeanor is completely changed. I don't know whether he's a Christian yet, but he already has that Christian demeanor. Something's happening in his life.
Is it
So,
because of his age or the real Christianity?
well, he comes to us to the class, and before he would always raise his hand and object and give the atheist response.
Yeah.
He said, "I'm here now." So, yeah. So things are happening in Al Lopez's life.
Just real quickly, Martin and Nancy, Warren and Nancy Martin,
Yes,
do they still come?
Nancy does. Warren has passed away, but Nancy's still very active in the
Oh, is she?
classes. Yeah. So, and very active with reasons to believe as well.
Well, tell her I say hello. when you
I
see her.
will. I will.
And tell Al I say hello.
I will, and I'll tell the class I got to see you.
Yeah.
They'll be excited. Okay, again, yes.
I have to make an apology for my question because it's my ignorance that's going to show. My question is, why was it necessary to expand RTB so widely and might it become its own religion?
Yes, well, 37 years ago, 38 years ago, we founded Reasons to Believe. We founded on the idea this is not just going to be a national organization. It's going to be international. And so I established a vision literally back in 1985 that we would eventually have Reasons to Believe organizations in different countries around the world with different scholar teams. But our vision was that the scholar teams would integrate. So the scholar teams in India and China would talk to one another, encourage one another, and likewise encourage us here in North America. So it's always been the vision. And you say, well, if the rule is, of course, each one has to be autonomous. I mean, the different nations demand that. But one way we're trying to keep some consistency is that we will not launch a Reasons to Believe overseas organization unless they own our mission statement, our doctrinal statement, and most importantly, our core values. So our core values is we want everybody as part of the team, including support staff, to manifest the attributes of gentleness, respect, and bold humility, to be humble in the way we present ourselves, but also to be bold to take up the opportunities that God gives us to share our faith, to be courageous in the way we share our faith, but to do it with gentleness, respect, and humility. And so we see an organization that starts with that but wanders off, then they lose their status as being a partner with us at Reasons to Believe. But we never had an issue with that. People said, no, we're totally on board with the mission statement, the doctrinal statement, and the core values, and the goal of reaching people for faith in Christ at the highest academic levels and then building all the way down.
I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you. Yes, you're next.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Watchful Dragons of C.S. Lewis. Could you identify for us what you see as some of those watchful dragons that block people from coming to faith in Christ?
Well, I think Romans 1 addresses them. It's that people engage in self-imposed ignorance. They know the truth, but they don't like the consequences of the truth. That, if you actually look at yourself in the light of God, He has authority over you. You don't have authority over Him. And I see that amongst a lot of my scientist peers. They believe in God, but they don't want God ruling over their lives. And therefore, they begin to structure their science accordingly. And it's not just scientists that do that. Lots of non-scientists do the same thing. So the book of Isaiah refers to this as idols. And we all have idols. So we're designed as human beings to worship. But I run into the atheists who say, I don't worship. But the truth is, everybody worships something. It might be a little white ball on a green patch of grass where you've got a scepter that you put up beside that white ball. It might be a sports event that you have to watch every Monday night on television. But we all worship something. And we all like to worship human beings. mean, you see that in the book of Acts, that during the Roman era, the people that were held in the highest esteem were the great orators. That hasn't changed. Every generation of humanity has followed the great orators. But like what Paul said, I don't come to you with oratory. I come to you with truth. And so I think that's important. Now, we've had speaking coaches come and try to help our scholars to communicate better to lay audiences, but we always emphasize it's not your oratory that's going to win people over. It's going to be your demeanor and your logic, your reasons, your words. So I'm less concerned about how flamboyant somebody is. In fact, it was interesting. Yeah, this part of it is culture. When I was in South Africa, the Christians there said, Hugh, you're way too subdued. You can't just stand in front of an audience. You didn't jump once in your whole speech. You should be jumping at least every 3 minutes. And you need to wave your hands around and you need to scream out and yell. But I remember these African scientists coming here to the US. And I said, hey, if you want people here in America to listen to you, you need to tone it down. If you start jumping like that, people think you're not credible. So there's cultural differences we need to understand and cross the cultural barriers. And I think that's true of churches. Scientists are a very different culture than your typical evangelical church. I remember the first time I invited some atheist physicists from Caltech to come to our church. 3 minutes into the sermon, they all stood up to challenge the speaker.
Yeah.
So now that's typical at Caltech, but most churches don't operate that way. And also remember those 6 coming to my class. And there's one guy who is a committed atheist, got super excited about the text we were reading in the book of Titus. And he said, this is amazing. We can do perturbative analysis on this text. And he ran to the blackboard and filled it with equations. And I said, you actually think everybody in the class here understands perturbative analysis? He said, yeah, of course. That's easy mathematics. So I said, well, let's turn around. Let's ask the class how many of them comprehend what you've written on the board. And there was one person that put their hand up. And this 93-year-old lady said, I think I'm in the wrong Sunday school class. But it's amazing that young atheist physicist immediately repented. He said, I had no idea. I was not trying to be arrogant. I was just excited about what I was reading in this text. And so people said, we're glad that you got excited. But can you please explain this to us in non-mathematical terms? He says, well, it'll be difficult for me, but I'll try. But that's an example of the kind of cultural barriers you have to cross, even here in North America. Yes.
Well, I have to tell you, I haven't changed since I last saw him. I'm still basically an agnostic. I was raised Jewish, but I mean, sort of, just reformed.
Well, Al, because of you, I had a great relationship with 5 rabbis.
Because of me.
Yeah, because you know what you would do? You would talk to the rabbis about what you heard me say, and then you'd bring their responses to me. I'll give my responses back to you, and you'd share it with the rabbis.
You sure that was me?
That was you, yeah.
And did you meet them in person? Or?
No, I had a relationship with them just because of you.
Oh, wow. So I have a reason to live.
You got a reason to believe.
I was trying, but okay, so I do have some questions. Just tell me when you want me to shut up.
You get one turn at a time. I'm gonna between each turn. I'll
Okay.
pick somebody else.
All right, then my first question is Trump the Antichrist?
I don't think so, but I'm also as the founder of Reasons to Believe, we say we're not going to take a political position. So when people ask me questions about Biden or Trump, say forget it. I'm not going to touch that. Now I will touch political matters that are moral. So people bring up issues about the value of life, or about the value of the unborn baby, or what we do with people that are elderly. Should we put them to death or let them continue living? Those to me are moral issues that the Bible is very explicit about. So we will take stands in that. But as a founder said, we're never going to identify politicians. We're not going to identify political parties. And that's something we encourage, both in India and South Africa and here in Canada. That, you know, part of the reasons to believe culture is that, you know, as Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. It's of a realm beyond this world. So we try to practice that. Okay, I'll take a question from somebody else in the back.
In 2005, there was a court case ruling against intelligent design in Dover, Pennsylvania.
Yes,
The judge ruled intelligent design is not science and it should not be taught in school.
yes.
What was the core of his reasoning?
Well, the reason why that Dover case went the way it did is that the intelligent design proponents were unwilling to separate themselves or distinguish themselves from young earth creationists. And back in 1987, the Supreme Court ruled, in fact, that's public, you can read it online, everything in that court ruling is now public. And they basically began by saying to the young earth creationists, why are you here? You already have the right to communicate in any public arena your belief systems on the condition that you can back it up with at least some scientific credibility. And they gave them an opportunity, you know, present your case. But what they discovered is they were not able to present any scientific support for their position. That Supreme Court ruling also noted Big Bang cosmology is on the public table. Even though it explicitly points to the God of the Bible, it's backed up by scientific credibility and integrity. So that's permitted. So they basically said, you already have the right, but it's got to be backed up with something that shows that it's got at least a modicum of scientific credibility and integrity. The reason why the Dover case went the way it did, the intelligent design proponents there were unwilling to distinguish themselves from the young earth creationists. And so you had the statement coming out of that case that intelligent design is young earth creationism in a cheap tuxedo. The intelligent design people could have easily gotten out of that. Now it's a little bit different today. At that time, the intelligent design movement got most of their financial support from young earth creationists. That's probably still true, but nowhere near to the same degree. It was back in 2005. I'm friends with a lot of the principals at Discovery Institute. I know of only one that's younger, all the others are older. So it's a different situation today than it was back in 2005. Okay, got a quick follow-up?
Yesterday's news on CTV showing three US military officials, whistleblowers, testifying before Congress that there's a UFO crash recovery program since 1930s. When asked if they had seen the crash material, they said they would only answer that question in a private setting, but not in public. But when asked if it was human or non-human on board, they answered it was, quote, non-human biologic, unquote. These crashed UFO and non-human biologic beings from outer space.
Yeah, we did a podcast on that a few weeks ago. It started Selling of God. I think it's already posted. If it's not, it'll be posted within a week or two, in which I answered that question over a 25-minute session. I'll try to be much, much briefer. But point one is that the idea that our government has been covering up a physical craft or artifacts from a physical craft since the 1930s simply is not credible. Our government's security is nowhere near good. And to give you an example, there was a president a few decades ago that tried to cover up a cassette tape. How successful was he? With all the power of the executive branch behind him, he can only keep it covered up for 11 days. So the idea that there's a 50-foot diameter UFO craft in a hangar since 1950, that's not credible. Some evidence would have come out. And what I share with people who tell me, hey, the government really has evidence. Well, where's there an artifact in a museum that I can see? For example, I've seen lunar rocks brought back from the Apollo astronauts. I've been able to touch those rocks. And I'm not the only one, lots of people have, but nobody has had that kind of an encounter with a relic from a UFO. Fuzzy photographs, yes, but nothing that's tangible that you can display in a museum where people are allowed to see it and touch it. That's never happened. Reason number two, it would simply violate the laws of physics for a spacecraft with physical beings on it to traverse interstellar space. And one reason we know that is because of Elon Musk's proposed mission to visit the nearest planet outside of our solar system. It's 4.2 light years away, really close. And so he says, well, to get there, we're gonna have to move at a high velocity. And so he's proposing sending spaceships at 1/10 to 2/10 the velocity of light. Now, I found that one equation everybody knows is E equals mc squared. Okay, c is the velocity of light. The faster you travel through interstellar space, the greater the damage to your spaceship. And the bigger the cross-section of your spaceship, the more damage you accumulate. And there's no way you can go 2/10 the velocity of light. No matter how tiny your spaceship, it's not going to make it. Now, even if it bumps into electrons and protons, that'll be sufficient to render the craft unusable. Well, Elon Musk has figured this out. So he said, we're going to send them at 1/10 the velocity of light, which means it takes 42 years to get there on a one-way trip. And he said, we're going to make the spaceships really small so they got a decent chance of survival. His proposal, make the spaceships no bigger than 10 centimeters across. And we're going to send 1,000 of them to the nearest star, understanding that over half of them will be completely destroyed. And the remainder will only be partly destroyed, but they'll be destroyed in different ways. And so we're going to be able to get back useful information from those 1,000 spaceships we send. But what that means is you can't send a termite across interstellar space. There's no way you can put a termite in a 10-centimeter diameter spaceship and have that termite survive going through interstellar space. There's no way to provide adequate protection. And we're certainly not going to send beings the size of us human beings. So interstellar space travel is physically impossible. But people who have written extensive books on UFOs said, well, maybe beings that are not part of our universe could make the trip. Beings that are not subject to the laws of physics. In fact, Jacques Vallée, he's a French astrophysicist who spent 60 years studying the UFO phenomena. He says, we got a problem. There's 2,000 documented cases where a UFO is observed going through the atmosphere and crashing into the earth. And you go to the crash site, there's a crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. Vegetation, the vegetation is damaged. But there's no debris or artifacts at the crash site. And when the UFO is recorded going through the atmosphere, no sonic boom and no heat friction. If it's a physical object, you're going to get heat friction, you're going to get a sonic boom, and you're going to get debris at the crash site. So Jacques Vallée said, we're dealing with something that is real, but it's interdimensional. It's not part of the dimensions of the universe. Well, the Bible speaks about interdimensional beings that are intelligent. So we're not the only intelligent species that God made. You know what I'm talking about right now.
Well, actually, didn't you once say, this isn't my official question, but didn't you once say that there's no intelligent life out there? God prepared the whole universe for us here on Earth.
Yes.
But now you just said something about the intelligent life, or maybe I'm some.
Okay, the laws of physics make it impossible for physical beings who who are subject to the laws of physics of the universe to traverse interstellar space.
Yeah.
But if you're talking angels, they're not subject to the laws of physics. So the dimensions of the universe are not an issue for them.
Okay, but I do have a really good question, if I may.
Okay, good question. Go for
Okay, well, I think it is. I just don't know how to get it out of my brain to you in a logical way, but. So there's the Trinity. There's the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. So apparently God. Gave up his only begotten Son, Jesus, to suffer the sins of all mankind.
it. Right.
So that we can have eternal life, but we have to believe that he did it. If we don't, or thank him, forget it. You have to have that belief in your heart. But what I don't quite understand either, but is God Jesus and is Jesus God? Because then I don't see what the sacrifice is. If God came down to this planet and then transformed somehow, or well, she was artificial. Mary was miraculously had child. So, but if that's God incarnate or whatever, however you want to explain it, then Jesus, who's now human, God transferred to a human being and wanted to experience, I guess, the pain of humans and all this, and suffer for mankind so that they could live eternally. But so then 2 days later, after he was dead, he rose. But of course he rose. If he's God, of course he can rise. And I don't understand the sacrifice, because God is Jesus, Jesus is God. So what's he giving now? Is this making any sense?
Yes, it is, but you need to understand the doctrine of the Trinity. Three distinct persons that are in relationship with one another. So the Father relates to the Son relates to the Father, the Spirit relates to the Father and the Son. Three distinct persons, but one essence, which means they have a single mind, a single set of purposes, a single set of attributes. As Jesus said, when you see me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah.
Now they're separate persons, but he's basically saying my personality and my attributes and the way I relate to you is no different than the way the Father does or the Spirit does. It's three persons and one essence. And what you might enjoy, there's an article up on our website, I think it was posted 2 weeks ago. Science only makes sense if God is triune. And that's one reason how I became a Christian, is basically looking at the gods I saw in the other religions of the world. They all made sense from a human perspective, but they all put God in the human box. The gods of the other religions are gods that you can comprehend within length, width, height, and time, the dimensions of our universe. What attracted me about the doctrine of the Trinity, this is a concept of God that can't be comprehended from just length, width, height, and time. It can't be comprehended from the laws of physics. And so this is evidence for me that God of the Bible is a God that transcends the universe, that transcends the cosmic dimensions. And of course, you've got the space-time theorems, which prove that there's an agent that creates our space-time dimensions. So of course, that agent is not limited by space and time, not limited by the laws of physics. That entity created that. But the problem you have with, say, the polytheistic religions, like you get in Hinduism and Buddhism, you've got all these gods that are involved in creation, but they all have different ideas about creation. It's not a single mind, it's not a single set of purposes. And so in Hinduism, there's this belief that when we study the record of nature, it's going to be filled with inconsistencies and incongruities. And one reason why we're seeing such success in addressing Hindu audiences, their study of science tells them Hinduism doesn't get it right. We look at science, there's a harmony, a consistency, a lack of incongruities. The biology fits seamlessly with the physics and the geology. It's all one coherent whole, which speaks of a single creator with a single mind and purpose. But the problem with Judaism And the problem with Islam is that they believe that God is one person only. So if God is a single person, who does he love before he creates? You got a God that can't receive love. You got a God that can't express love. Because love by definition is a relationship between at least two persons. And so I remember having a debate with Islamic apologists and said, okay, where does love come from?
Love?
And they said, well, love comes when God creates. And I said, well, the problem with that is you got a God who has no experience of love, creating beings that do. And the core mantra of Islam is nothing is greater than God. And so, well, you got a problem here. You've got this God all by himself, no one to love, no one to receive love from, and he creates beings that have both capabilities. In that context, it makes us greater than God. And they say, oh no, that's blasphemy. Nothing is greater than God. But it says you've got an inconsistent position. So that's the problem with Judaism and Islam. I remember debating. Ken Samples and I debated two Jewish apologists. And the moment we brought up the origin of love, dead silence, which was ironic because for a 2-hour period, Ken and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. They were just talking incessantly. When we raised that question, dead silence, we waited for about 5 minutes. They didn't say a word. They realized, okay, we have no response for that. So God, again, the Trinity only, or science only makes sense if God is triune. And likewise, the doctrine of redemption only makes sense if God is triune. Because you've got one person of the Trinity saying, I'll take upon myself the sacrifice. You've got another person of the Trinity saying, I'll pour upon you the wrath that's deserved by every sinner that's ever existed. And so the Father turns his back on the Son and pours out upon him all the wrath that is deserved for the unholy actions of every human being who ever lived. And you say, what about the resurrection? Well, here's the doctrine of the Trinity again. There are passages in the Bible that say God the Father raised the Son from the dead. There are other passages that say the Holy Spirit raised the Son from the dead. And there are passages that say the Son himself raised himself from the dead. And the Bible also is clear, there's only one resurrection. Well, this is the doctrine of the Trinity. In one context, there's three. In another context, there's just one. I mean, my own mother, for a 30-year period, said, Hugh, I know you're a Christian, but the Trinity does not make mathematical sense. It's a mathematical contradiction. And every time I tried to explain to her, well, it's only a mathematical contradiction. If we look at it from a human perspective, she would interrupt me and change the subject. But there came a day in her 70s when I sent her a DVD where I explained all of this. And I got a phone call from my father. She said, son, for the first time, your mother couldn't interrupt you. And she got it. She now understood the Trinity.
I'm more confused, but
Well, you should be, because after all, the Trinity is something that can't be visualized by humans, but we can prove it's mathematically correct. I mean, you're studying here at York University.
Well, yeah, I just graduated.
Okay, you just graduated, great.
Summa cum laude, but don't tell.
Okay. Well, one of the things we learned taking physics, in physics, there's lots of things we cannot visualize, but we can prove are true. A quick example. Light is both particles and waves. When you think about that, that doesn't make any sense. How can they possibly be simultaneously particles and waves? And yet we've got overwhelming physics that proves that's exactly the way it works. And if we introduce quantum mechanics, we can have our cake and eat it too. But who really can visualize quantum mechanics? We can't. But we can prove it's true. Or we can prove if you don't have a universe with quantum mechanics, you don't have stable atoms, you don't have stable molecules, and there's no possibility for life. So the fact that in something as simple as physics, we got things we can't visualize that we can prove are true, means we shouldn't be surprised that in theology, We have things we can't visualize, but we can prove are true.
Real quick, did God literally give Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai? Do you believe that he said, here they are, here are the 10? Just curious.
I do.
You do?
I also believe that the tablets got smashed and there is a second set.
Seriously?
Yeah, that's in your Torah. Check it out.
What, where's the second set?
Well, they were put in the Ark of the Covenant. But what do you see in Jeremiah? The Ark of the Covenant will never be recovered. It'll never be found. And so all those of you who watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, Jeremiah tells us that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but didn't Moses come down? He had 3 tablets. He smashed one. He said, first, I have 15 commandments for you. Smashed one. Said, oh, I got 10 commandments. That was Mel Brooks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was Mel Brooks, right? Take it back.
My question was about is there ever a point where trying to reason, like, is there a limit to how much we should be reasoning our faith? And where a point where it becomes like a mission where we can't, I know you're talking about the Trinity, and that's one of those things where it's kind of hard to wrap our heads around. Maybe we could like semi-understand it, maybe you could get to a point in like where you do understand it, but just generally regarding like many other things also about our faith and these philosophical questions and technical questions, theological questions, where we can give good answers and we should use our reason, our God-given reason, but where there's like a limit to where we kind of have to surrender and just be like, this is a divine mystery, or can we explain everything?
Yeah, we'll never be able to explain everything. As Paul tells us, we look through a glass darkly. And because we're constrained to the space-time dimensions of the universe, we can never learn everything about the universe. Kurt Gödel in 1930 produced the incompleteness theory, which basically makes that point. If you're constrained inside a system, there's no way you can learn everything about that system. You got to be outside the system to learn everything about the system. Well, we're inside the universe. We're not outside of it. There's a limit to how much we can learn, which means as an astrophysicist, I don't have to worry about being unemployed because now there's nothing more to learn about the universe. There's always going to be more about the universe. In fact, what's I find amazing about my discipline, the knowledge base doubles every 5.5 years. So today we know twice as much about the universe as we knew 5.5 years ago. I don't think that's going to end. We're going to continue to find more and more, but there is a difference between what we can reason and what we can visualize. As I just explaining here to Al, there are things that we can reason to be true that we'll be able to visualize. And we would expect that with a God that transcends the universe. I mean, we don't know much about what's going on in the realm of fact. It's impossible for any scientist to observe any phenomena outside of the space-time dimensions of the universe. If God made 10 universes, we can only investigate one. Was Einstein has shown that once you've got observers in a universe, those observers can never detect the possible existence of other universes. So yeah, we got to be content with ignorance. There's a lot of things we're not going to know, at least in this realm. Yes.
Just on our brother's question, brother, about what's your vision? How do you see the world in say 2030 or 2040 around these fields of biology, astrophysics, artificial intelligence, advanced technology? How do you see it? Is there illumination from the Bible, any insights from the Holy Spirit that will, and where do you see the Church of Jesus Christ in terms of its outreach and her ability to function in this kind of world in the future? Right?
Well, we got two things going, one thing going for us and one thing going against us. The one thing going for us is that the more we learn about nature, the more evidence we have for our Christian faith. I mean, I put out a blog called Today's New Reason to Believe. And why at the time I could write a dozen articles like that every day. That's so much as being published in the scientific literature. That makes a stronger case for the Christian faith. That's what's going for us. What's going against us is the more we learn, the greater the pride of humanity. And that pride can be a barrier to discerning the truth. Only the humble can come to faith in Jesus Christ. And I like what God says at the end of the book of Job, chapter 42. He says, you humans have been able to tame all these animals. You've even been able to tame the Leviathan and the behemoth, the two most difficult non-human animals to tame. It says humans are the same way. Some are easy to tame, some are difficult to tame. But it says, notice it took a higher being to tame those animals. He says, in the same context, only I can bring humility to a proud human heart. And he says, what Job did is he recognized, I don't have that humility, but God will give it to me if I ask. He says, Job's 3 friends, they haven't done that. So that's why he called upon Job to pray for him. Right here, this lady. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you.
Firstly, respect and very much for your work. Excellent questions. Comment and you've initiative and that is certainly something slow and it's better than engagement. But my question is, what's your take on globalism in terms of increasing concentration of power, which would also kind of this question came up.
If you repeat that, I didn't quite hear it.
What's your take on globalism in terms
On
of
globalism,
increasing concentration of power
yes.
and the United Nations and WHO and what with you and all these and the internet and all these things seem to be conglomerating to one world government?
Yeah, I think a good text to go to is Genesis chapter 11. When God told the post-flood people, multiply and fill the earth. And we just see halfway through Genesis 11, humanity said, we're not going to do it. We're going to stay in one place, build a city, and build a tower, so we will not be scattered over the face of the earth. And what was God's response? It was antitrust legislation. Forcibly scattered humanity over all the land masses of the earth, gave them different languages, because he was recognizing if we got one government ruling over all the people of the earth, it's just going to be the same problem you get when one corporation gets a monopoly over a product. What do? They lower the quality of the product and raise the price. So they're oppressing all the customers. How do you break that up? Antitrust legislation, different corporations competing for customers, which is going to motivate them to increase the value of the product and drop the price. Same thing's true of governments. If they have to compete with one another for citizens, especially for quality citizens, they have to set up a government where there's going to be freedom and a lack of oppression and a good economy. I mean, I just read today that Canada took in 1.2 million immigrants in the past year. Well, I think a lot of that is a testimony to the fact that people realized, I go to Canada, I got economic opportunity. I'm not going to be under a lot of oppression. But you know, the Canadian government decides to be oppressive. Guess what? We'll lose 1 million people a year to other countries. But that's the danger of globalism. You take away the competition for citizens.
Can we take a break? There's coffee and some cookies over there. Take a break for about 10 minutes and then we're going to join again.
We got
All right.
more, we can ask more questions.
Yes, of course.
I got a one thing question. I think so. Is this being related?
Fun with this question. So when I asked the question, if you could put a number in terms of percentage on your personal belief on the likelihood of a multiverse existing, number one, and then unpack your personal view on the multiverse.
Okay, you want to find a more in-depth answer. It's in the 4th edition of The Creator and the Cosmos. And in one sense, there has to be a multiverse. Because in order to have life in the universe, there has to be an inflation event in the expansion of the universe. When it's about a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second old. And that inflation does predict that there will be other space-time realms. But it doesn't say how many. But it does say they're likely all to be different from one another. Now, I remember speaking in the 1980s, both here in Canada and the United States, saying eventually the evidence from fine-tuned designs for the God of the Bible will become so pervasive and so overwhelming that atheists will have no other option but to hypothesize and appeal to an infinite number of universes where they're all different from one another and claim that our universe has all the characteristics that makes our existence possible by pure chance, not by God.
What year did you say that?
That was in the early 1980s.
Oh,
In the year 2000, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
Atheists started
yeah.
talking about the multiverse, which is the idea that there's an infinite number of universes where they're all different from one another. And by pure chance, we wind up with all the characteristics we need for life in this universe. I remember saying to audiences back in the 1980s, anytime an atheist appeals to infinity, they've got nothing. You can explain anything by appealing to infinity. In fact, it was Leonard Susskind, an agnostic theoretical physicist, who said a few years ago, we atheists have got to stop using the multiverse. It explains everything. An explanation that explains everything explains nothing. Now, he dropped it at that. What I did in the 4th edition of The Creator and the Cosmos was to give an analogy that makes his point. And what you need to understand, infinity plus infinity equals infinity. Infinity times infinity equals infinity. Infinity to the infinity power equals infinity. So if you're going to appeal to a multiverse, that means that you're going to have an infinite number of planets with the identical features of planet Earth. And on planet Earth, we have a wide variety of species of life. But if you've got an infinite number of planets, just like planet Earth, on those infinite number of planet Earths, you'll have an infinite variety of birch tree species. And this is Canada. There's lots of birch trees here in Canada. They have the characteristic that they peel thin white pieces of bark. But if you've got an infinite variety of birch tree species, one of those species will peel perfectly rectangular white pieces of bark that measure 8.5 by 11 inches. I don't know what it is in centimeters. And those pieces of white rectangular birch bark will fall on soils with chemicals in them that'll make random markings on those pieces of rectangular birch bark. And those markings, if you got an infinite number of universes, will duplicate all the paragraphs, equations, photographs, tables, and every scientific research paper that's ever been published. Which means those millions of scientific research papers are not the product of the minds of scientists. The multiverse did it. And so what Leonard Susskind is pointing out, if you're going to appeal to the multiverse to eliminate design by God, it simultaneously eliminates design by every human being that ever existed. So it's philosophically inconsistent. Now, I could also pose the argument positively. If the atheists are right about the multiverse, then the more we learn about the universe, at some point, the evidence that points to God will decline, plateau, and drop. But if we're right that it's God that's behind the fine-tuning, the evidence for that fine-tuning design will continue to accumulate, and we'd expect it to accumulate exponentially as we exponentially expand our knowledge base. And that's been the testimony of the fine-tuning argument for 2,000 years, which is why, from a positive perspective, it points to God, not to a mindless multiverse. But if you want more details, you can check out The Creator and the Cosmos, 4th edition. Yes.
Just want to say thank you very much. You attributed to you saving my faith, and then
incredibly. Alumni of the University of Toronto, 1993, environment resource management. And so I'm learning about geography and plate tectonics and the absolute age of planet Earth and the universe. And then I get a hold of a few of your books, and then everything beautifully and wonderfully makes sense. I just want to thank you for that. One of the linchpins in my discussion with non-Christians about God and his creative process and being an artist, and maybe even hopefully speaks and refutes the multiverse, is the oxynucleic acid. Recall one of your books that you talked about when you finally human geneticists finally completely mapped DNA. I think you said something to that, and I'd like you to clarify and maybe retell the story just so I can tend to embellish stories and repeat them. And just to get back to the core basics. And you said, I think you made an anecdote of you knew a geneticist, and he said that pretty much right down to almost the very last one of them in their community, they now believe in a divine creator, just simply because of how, I don't know how beautiful DNA is, but just how infinitely complex it is.
Yeah, I think the story you're talking about is it happened at the 1999 Origin of Life Research Conference that was held at UC San Diego. And the foremost Origin of Life researcher gave the opening plenary session, Leslie Orgel. And I remember him pacing in front of the audience at the beginning of his lecture. And he said, I sure hope there are no creationists in the audience for what I'm now going to say. He says, I am the father of the RNA model for the origin of life, which is basically the model that chemistry produced a simple RNA molecule that became a more complicated RNA molecule that led to DNA and proteins. But he said, I'm here to tell you, it would take a miracle for an RNA molecule to show up on the face of the earth. So, and of course, as a creationist, I wrote down his comment verbatim. And it shows up in our book, Origins of Life. But Leslie Orgel, he spent the next hour explaining why it's simply not credible for an RNA molecule, a protein, or DNA to show up under the conditions. He says that's a huge barrier to our work models.
What about that plastic bowl out on the front with a
Come from? Well, fast forward to 2017. Every 3 years they have an Origin of Life research conference. At that one, they decided to devote the main theme of the Origin of Life conference. Where do the building blocks of life molecules come from? And they wound up having 6 of the world's leading people on that question, each speak for 15 minutes. And they had to answer the question, yes or no. Do we understand where the building blocks come from? All 6 agreed, we don't even know where the building blocks of life molecules come from. And moreover, we have no confidence we'll ever learn. So, and a big part of the problem is that not only are we cannot explain, like for example, there are 20 amino acids that make up your proteins. And they said, well, we found amino acids in the meteorites, but they've only found 9 of the 20 amino acids. And 95% of the amino acids they've found are glycine. The simplest of the amino acids only has 10 atoms. That makes it 95% of what they've recovered. And those 9 that they found are the simplest of the 20 bioactive amino acids. And there's a paper on our website that I wrote, basically saying we're not going to find the basic amino acids, the amino acids that are made under basic conditions. So like arginine and the lysine, we're not going to find those because here are a group of atheist Origin of Life researchers explaining why it's impossible for those amino acids to rise under naturalistic conditions. So, and tryptophan is another one that's not going to happen under naturalistic conditions. And you can't have life unless you got all 20. So the fact that we have several that can't be put together. And the other big problem is, even if you got the amino acids, they can only be linked together to make proteins if they're all left-handed. And the 2017 research conference, the lady that was a leading expert on what is called the homochirality problem, how do you get all the amino acids left-handed? She says, well, we do know mechanisms that we can control in the laboratory, where we can destroy the right-handed amino acids slightly more efficiently than the left-handed amino acids. And she talked about her experiment where they wound up with 80% left-handed and 20% right-handed. But she also conceded, we started with an enormous sample and we got to 80-20, we had hardly any left. And said all of her model projections predicted long before you get to 100%, you got no amino acids left at all. You're simply destroying one hand more efficiently than the other. The other major problem is to get that destruction to work properly, you need circularly polarized ultraviolet light, such as the light that's emitted from black holes and neutron stars. Not exactly an ideal environment for origin of light chemistry. It's the worst environment in the universe. And that's what you need to get the homochirality to work. So, and yes, you can get some success in the lab, but all you're demonstrating is somebody a lot smarter and better funded with greater technology must have done it than these biochemists making their achievements in the lab. And an article we got up on our website, it's called The Hand of God Dilemma, written by an atheist origin of life researcher who wrote an article in the British journal Nature, basically saying, we origin of life chemists need to tell our readers how many times we commit the hand of God dilemma. Basically inject our intelligence, our technology, and our funding and laboratory control to get the results that we want. But all that does is demonstrate somebody smarter than us must have done it. And he says, I don't know of a single significant origin of life chemistry experiment where we don't commit the hand of God dilemma at least a dozen times. But we need to tell our readers how many times we commit it.
So, so even if we had an infinite number of multiverses, it still wouldn't happen.
Time is not on the side of the atheists. And a large sample size is not on the side of the atheists. It makes things worse. It doesn't make things bigger. Because the whole system is guided by thermodynamics. It was Jesus who said, in this world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. I like to paraphrase that. In this world you'll have thermodynamics, but take heart, I've overcome the world of thermodynamics. With thermodynamics ruling the systems, time is not on the side of the atheists. It's going to get worse, not better. Yes.
Following on to your comment there, what do you think about the whole idea of scientists playing God by creating different forms of life by manipulating genetics? And one of my favorite maxims is Harding's law. You can never do merely one thing. So we always risk serious things when we, unlike the creator who knows how to do it properly, we do these very powerful things.
Yeah, well, my colleague Fazal Rana has written a book called Creating Life in the Lab. And he makes it very clear, they're simply re-engineering life. They're not creating life from scratch. They're taking existing life forms and altering some of the biochemical structures to create a slightly different life form. Now, that technology has been somewhat successful. And as Spence points out in his book, it has the potential of producing much benefit, but it also has the potential of creating much harm, which is the way it is with every human technological advance. Even the invention of the knife can be used for good purposes, it can be used for evil purposes. And this new biochemical technology is in the same category. I'll give you an example where people are actually coming up with good uses. We can it's already been done, taking a bacterium, engineering it, so they can process petrochemical waste and actually turn it into something useful. They're now able to re-engineer viruses where the virus can change the genetics of the animal and basically cure a genetic defect. They're using the virus as a vector to bring in the biochemical alteration needs to happen at the genetic level. So we have the potential of re-engineering viruses basically to cure a lot of diseases that were impossible for us to cure. And likewise, we can eliminate a lot of diseases. Well, that's more challenging. And we've all heard of the COVID crisis, right? Potentially, those vaccines could have eradicated COVID once and for all, but only if you get 100% of the population inoculated, which as we know is not going to happen. That's impossible. The only way it works is you've got a disease that's so deadly that everybody says, sign me up. So smallpox got eliminated several years ago. We're close to eliminating polio. That's all done by re-engineering these viruses, or actually taking a part of the virus and using that. But yeah, but you could also do the same thing to produce a virus that would be a killer epidemic that wipe out an entire population. So germ warfare is a real risk that we face today that we never faced in the past. So it's just like the knife. We can use it for good purposes. We can use it for evil purposes. Yes.
Brother Ross, just as you're saying, well, biological, like weapons can be one of the great fears of our day. Artificial intelligence. Now, one of those things that Elon Musk saying even the Gates saying more dangerous than biological weapons and so on. Now, I can ask you, what is the nth degree to which you see artificial intelligence and the large language model being used in our day? And also, caveat to that is, how is the church, how do we as God's people, how do you see us using that in the future to impact people?
Yeah, good question. I think about 2 months ago, you'll find an article I wrote on artificial intelligence on our website, reasons.org, where I basically say it can be used for good, it can be used for evil. But there are limitations. People think that AI is going to replace humanity. Not going to happen. AI is very powerful in being able to take a huge database and give you a review. And so professors basically have to give up on assigning their students, hey, write a review paper. Because you can go to ChatGPT and it'll do it for you in just a few seconds. So, but these AI platforms cannot reason. They're they can only work with data that you feed in. They can't generate new databases. And in some cases, it looks like they're generating new databases, but what they're doing is they're taking existing databases that have been fed into the system and basically manipulating it to look like a new database. But if an expert looks at it, he realizes this is not a new database. It's simply a manipulation of what's already in the system. So it can't generate new information, it can't generate new databases, and it can't reason.
What about the predictive modeling that they're using and generating, like Amazon's predictive modeling, where it's like in terms of like we're buying things from Amazon, but it'll know the next 10 best things that are, and also using predictive modeling for weather, integrating these technologies like artificial intelligence with supercomputers with other technologies, the integration of these technologies.
No, it's very good at that. I mean, so for example, artificial intelligence is going to deliver far better climate models than we have today, because it can literally take in enormous amounts of data from weather stations all over the world over the past 100 years, and only an AI system actually has the power to integrate all that data. On the other hand, AI also has the potential for going off on tangents. And so what you need to do is get someone who's an expert in climate and atmospheric physics to work with the AI system and guide it to the answer they want. And you have, they did an experiment. As a paper was published by a team of Japanese computer programmers, where they had artificial intelligence compete with senior expert researchers in the subject that was being addressed, and then junior expert researchers. And what they discovered is the senior researchers always beat the artificial intelligence.
So can you explain?
But
this?
often the artificial intelligence beat the junior experts.
Can you explain this? Because we know artificial intelligence can get and beat like the best Go players in the world, the best Russian.
Oh, sure.
champions in the world,
Yeah.
Logically, and recently, like, it terahop, they're hops a second, so it's, they can outthink the greatest minds, right, in terms of like.
Yeah, but those greatest minds fed them the information. So like this AI system that became the Go champion of the world, they fed it tens of thousands of Go games.
Right. Neural networks.
And they actually had the system play the world's best Go players.
Yeah.
But every time it played, it stored the information, figured out where it made a mistake, where the human player made a mistake, and self-corrected it.
Yes.
So it wasn't very long before it could beat the world's best Go player. Mainly because the world's best Go player cannot keep in their mind the database of 3 million Go games.
Yeah.
But a supercomputer can do that.
Yeah.
So, but guess what? It's all dependent on the data that was fed in. If you didn't feed in those tens of thousands of Go games, it wouldn't be able to pull it off. And if it didn't play itself, and if it didn't play these expert players, it wouldn't pull that off. I'll give you an example of where you get a serious limitation. There's an artificial intelligence platform known as Minerva. It's 3 times bigger than ChatGPT. And they said, let's see if it can solve simple math problems. And what they did is they controlled the diet. Unlike ChatGPT, we're only going to give it mathematics textbooks. And we're only going to feed it math problems. And so what they did is they fed in all these examples of algebra solutions, but they showed Minerva step by step all the reasoning that was done to get the right answer. And so Minerva figured, okay, here are these hundreds of thousands of examples of algebra problems that's been fed into me. There's nothing to divert it. All it was fed was algebra, nothing else. So there was no diversion. Didn't get confused by calculus or get confused by trigonometry. It was all algebra. How well did it do? When you give it simple grade 9 algebra problems to solve, this is not Canadian, this is US algebra, which is at a much lower level than what you get in Canada. Okay, Minerva only got 50% right. And where it got right is where it found problems that are identical to what was fed into the system. It could not do any original reasoning,
But how do you,
none whatsoever.
how do you understand this? Because we know that ChatGPT for about zero doing like the bar exam and doing that like medical exams for entrance in university, and like you just said earlier that our US is like at a reading at a grade 8 level and grade 10 level, but we have like ChatGPT and the artificial intelligence is more intelligent than most of the people in society, and yet.
Well, they can do well on a medical exam
Well,
because medicine is very data heavy.
yeah.
And if you feed all that data into an artificial intelligence machine, it's not at all surprising that it outperforms an individual med student.
And 80%, 90% and above.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
But notice it does miserably poor on grade 9 algebra problems. And that's where you sift it out, only give it the simple problems. So here's a system 3 times bigger than ChatGPT. It's only fed math, nothing else. And look how badly it performs. So now put a human being with it, the performance skyrockets. So put a math professor in with Minerva, now you get really good results.
I think the difference is a lot of confusion in my mind about what people think of AI. And like, a lot of people think that AI is thinking process, and it's not, it's just a database that has access to a ton of information, but there's no thinking behind it.
Yeah, it doesn't think. But boy, can it manipulate data at lightning speeds. I mean, what's amazing is you give ChatGPT an assignment, rewrite this article, but I want it from this perspective, designed for this audience. You get the result in 3 seconds. So. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your thinking? Because AI, it's working through patterning data. And because it can has such a broad base of data to work with. What about when it comes to like now it's starting to manipulate, like in marketing and different areas? What's your feeling about that for the future? Because you have you have it where it's actually manipulating humans because it sees the patterns of where we're weak. And
Well, one of the
from
first
there.
uses of AI was in marketing. And so, for example, you notice how retail stores are different than they were 20 years ago. Because they basically fed in all the customer data from the store, and they figured, okay, put these two products together, put them at this location of the store, you'll sell more product. That's all done through AI. And so, yeah, we're being manipulated by AI because AI figures out, okay, this is how humans behave. We have this enormous database of millions of purchases. And so people have used AI to sell way more product. Now, where I see a very harmful use of AI is something that's already happening in the People's Republic of China, where they got millions of cameras, basically looking, and it's not just spatial recognition. The technology they have in China is so good, they can figure out who you are out of 1 billion people by the way you walk. So you can be identified just by your walking pattern. And of course, they're watching your behavior. What you're saying to people in public. And so we see in the People's Republic of China, everybody's got a social credit rating. And so if you're in line with the government, while the government wants you to behave, you get a bigger salary, you get a better apartment to live in, you get to eat better food, your children go to better education. But if you're going against the party line, guess what? You get less money, your children don't get to go to the best institutions. So it's Big Brother. It's kind of like 1984, only it's 2024, where you got this government system that's watching in detail the behavior of every human being in the population and basically forcing them to toe a party line. None of that would have been possible without artificial intelligence. With artificial intelligence, that can happen. Read the book of Revelation. It indicates a time will come when that'll be the condition, not just of people living in China, but people living all over the world.
Oh, in the back.
In the back, okay.
Just a quick follow-up on this discussion, and you spoke about globalism also. What are your ideas or thoughts on how to reverse or work against this kind of trend where things are going, like, how could we, yeah.
Well, all this technology we've been talking about, it feeds globalism, because with globalism, you can enhance the economy. And so, for example, if we could actually organize nations into common economies, that actually increases the growth of that economy. So there's a strong motivation to go from 200 nations down to say 30 nations or 10 nations, and eventually 1 nation. And the selling point is we can increase the economy. I mean, we're discovering, for example, by the elimination of cash, you can enhance the economy. But again, you look at Revelation where there'll be no cash at all. And, that's a one way for government to actually control its citizens. But it does have an economic benefit. So the question is, are you willing to trade your freedom for greater economy, for more amount of money in your wallet, more capability of a living standard? So that's a risk we're facing right now. And you say, how do you counter it? Well, money is not the answer to human happiness. And I think getting the Christian message out there that was most valuable is not the money in your pocket. It's your capability of being to live a righteous life. And so I'm all in favor of putting a lot more effort into the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Because that's really going to impress upon people, hey, you're only here for 80 or 90 years. And there's a lot more to life than just what we experience here on planet Earth. And we need to prepare for the future. I kind of look at like our life here on planet Earth as getting a degree at a college. It's preparing you for a future career. So just like students realize, my life is not my college experience. It's the career that I'll gain from that college background. Well, likewise, we're all headed for a future career. And we're told it's going to be extremely fulfilling. Which one?
Lady in blue.
Lady in blue, okay.
Nice to meet you. Could you give us your top reasons to believe that Jesus is God's chosen Messiah? And
Okay.
second,
Yeah, I'd say the top reason to believe in Jesus Christ as God and the Messiah would be the historical evidence for the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Everyone I know has studied that has come away by saying this really did happen. I mean, there's a book written in the 19th century by 3 lawyers who were atheists, and they wound up concluding after studying the historical evidence that the historical case for the bodily resurrection of Jesus from the dead was stronger than the historical case for the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo. And those 3 authors were all alive at the time of the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo. So that to me would be the top of the list. That's also the top of the list of the Apostle Paul. He basically said that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead didn't happen. We as Christians are to be pitied for believing a lie. But if it did happen, then we are basically right to declare that Jesus indeed is God and the Messiah. Now, you'll also find at reasons.org, I was asked to write an article on the 5 top scientific evidences for the Christian faith. So this isn't the historical evidence, this is scientific evidence. Let me see if I can remember them. Number 1, the evidence we have that the universe has a beginning that includes the beginning of space and time itself, implying a causal agent beyond space and time. Number 2, the fine-tuning we see of the universe and all of its subcomponents that not only make our existence possible, but our redemption possible. Number 3 would be the case for the origin of life. The fact that we can show it must be a supernatural event. Number 4 would be the origin of human beings, created in the image of God with body, soul, and spirit. That we are unique in the context of all life here on planet Earth. We alone have the image of God. And number 5 would be just the case we have for the historical and scientific accuracy of the first 11 chapters of Genesis. I say that because that's the number 1 reason why skeptics reject the Bible as the Word of God. It's hard to get them to John 3:16 if you can't get them out of the book of Genesis. But I'm just showing people how powerful the scientific case is for the inerrancy, what we see in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Okay, I call that the big 5. Okay, who's next?
Lady in white in front.
Okay,
Thank you. At what age did you come to know God?
I came to know God when I was a sophomore physics student at the University of British Columbia. I was 19 years of age at the time.
19?
19. And that was after 2 years study of a Gideon Bible. Okay.
Alex, that was
Now,
Thank you. The Torah is the word of God. Is that correct? Or you were just talking about Genesis and how accurate it is.
yeah.
correct?
The
Maybe I'm
Torah,
not, sorry?
the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah. But in Genesis, the verse about Noah and the flood, there's 2 versions in that same verse. One says 150 days of rain, floods, all that, and a pair of animals going into the ark. Then at the end of it, I think, but in the same verse, it says 40 days and 40 nights, and 7 pairs of animals. So they took the 40 from one and how do you explain that? That's 2 different versions in the same chapter.
Well, actually read what it says in Genesis 7 and 8. It says 40 days and 40 nights of torrential nonstop rain.
Yeah.
However, it says that the flood remains high for 150 days. And what you also see in the text, in addition to the water from the rain clouds, you get water from the underground aquifers. I also believe you get water from the melting snow and ice on the mountains surrounding that region. And so that water supply is sufficient to keep the flood high for 150 days. Then it takes a year for the flood waters to recede, which again is an indication there's got to be a lot of melting snow and ice. Only when you got a huge amount of melting snow and ice can you sustain a flood for that long period of time. Now, as far as the animals go, it says 1 pair of the unclean animals, 7 pairs of the clean animals. Why? Because those clean animals were going to be used for sacrifice after the flood. And also they're going to be used to reestablish human civilization. So those clean animals are the animals that we use for agriculture. That would include the horses, the cows, the sheep, the goats, the chickens, the doves. These are animals that played a crucial role in human civilization. So you're going to need more of these than you do of the unclean animals. So for example, you only need 1 pair of ocelots because we don't use a lot of those. We don't sacrifice those animals and we don't use them in our agricultural activity. So God says 1 pair is enough. But 7 pairs of these ones you're going to need to use to a greater degree.
Why didn't God phrase it the way you just did?
It did. Read the Bible. Well, I mean, I get this, for example, I debated Michael Shermer, the executive director of the Skeptic Society. He raised that exact same question.
He did.
And he said, the Bible's a contradiction. It says 7 pairs here, 1 pair here.
Yeah.
I said, Michael, read the context.
Okay.
1 pair of unclean, 7 pairs of clean. And he didn't bother to explain that to the audience. Same thing with the 40 days and 150 days. I mean, it's all there if you read the text.
But it's separated. It doesn't, it's not together. In other words, it's not,
It is to so the 70 and the 40, it's in the same paragraph. So it's not that
it's in
far
the same
apart.
paragraph.
Yeah. So
Can I ever prove you wrong? I mean, before I die, can I just prove you wrong once? So you could say, Alan, you're right. Just once. Just once.
well, you know what? My wife has done that way more than once. A lot of times.
Well, I'm not gonna marry her.
No. But what you could do is read the whole of the Bible.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Yeah.
you know what? I read the whole Bible. I actually took a course, study of the Bible in modern context. So there was a professor that taught the first term. He had a PhD in Hebrew studies. Then another professor for the winter term had a PhD in Christian studies. And guess what? They were both atheists.
Yeah.
They were both. He said, "Leave your faith at the door, but we'll teach you." About why this was written then and the mechanics behind it, you know, not just faith and stuff like that. But anyways, I just found that interesting.
Well, my wife had that same experience. She was a professor of English at the university. And she said, hey, how about if I teach the class on the Bible's literature? They said, we can't let you teach the class. You actually believe it. We only let atheists teach this class. Well, guess what? You're going to get an atheistic bias if you take the class. Makes sense, right?
Oh, is that how that works?
That's how that works, right?
So they generally don't have, people that teach those courses are generally not,
They're not believers.
but you can go to a seminary, obviously, then you have people teaching that are
But there's no substitute for reading it for yourself.
the Bible.
Yeah, read
Well,
it for yourself,
okay,
word for word.
word for word.
Yeah, whole thing.
Yes, sir. I'll have a report for you in the morning on your desk.
Fantastic.
It's starting to get late. We're gonna have maybe two more questions and then we're gonna call it quits for the night.
Dr. Ross, earlier you mentioned that the creation, the origin of the universe makes no sense unless it's understood in Trinity context. Can you elaborate what you mean by that? And also, can you tell me the topics that you'll be speaking the next 3 days?
Oh, boy, next 3 days, maybe George can remember what I'm speaking of. Next 3 days. It's mystery. I do know I'm going to be giving a lecture on integrating science and Genesis. I'm also going to be giving a lecture on beyond the cosmos, which kind of answers the question you're talking about how physicists have discovered that just to understand the physics of the universe, we need 10 space-time dimensions. And we have the space-time theorems, which prove those 10 space-time dimensions were created. So God's got to be bigger than 10 space-time dimensions. And what I'm going to do in the talk is say, okay, given that minimum demonstration of God's power, what does that tell us about God? So, and hey, it's a lecture that all of you can give, but I'm going to basically show you how you can give the same talk to children or to adults.
Doing that tomorrow or Saturday, or what are you doing then?
It's either Sunday, Saturday, or tomorrow. I forget which.
Well, it's not Saturday, no, it's either the Friday or the Sunday.
It's either the Friday or the Sunday.
Well, could you tell me where you're speaking and what time and,
Give me your email, I'll send you an email.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You do email, this is the first time I came because you're here.
I think it's Church on the Rock in Richmond Hill.
Yes.
I think that's it.
Oh. If you already got my email, then you know this whole schedule.
When did you send the email?
This morning,
Oh, you did? This
Yeah.
morning.
And you can go to reasons.org, look events. It'll give you information there.
Reasons.org.
Yeah, under events.
Okay.
one more question is in the back somewhere.
There was a part of this question about the Trinity of God and how Dr. Ross sees it as integration.
Yeah. They're basically making the point that physics now establishes that the causal agent must be an entity beyond space and time, beyond length, width, height, and time. And therefore, we'd expect that a message from God would show at least some of the features of a being that's transcendent to our space-time dimensions. And so one thing that impressed me about the Bible is that unlike all the other holy books I looked at, I couldn't put all the teachings in the Bible into a context that we human beings can visualize. It's just like what I saw in physics. Light is both particles and waves at the same time. Something I can't visualize, but I can prove is true. And so everything I saw in the Hindu Vedas, I can understand from what we humans can experience. But the Bible only talks about God being a Trinity, talks about how God is holding us responsible for all of our words, thoughts, and actions. And it also says he predetermines all of our words, thoughts, and actions before he created the universe. You're not going to visualize that one in length, width, height, and time. But notice the Bible's got about 1,500 passages that teach divine predetermination, and also about 1,500 passages that teach human free choice, and 8 passages that teach both in the same sentence. Again, you can't visualize that in length, width, height, and time. But what I do in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, is show you 3 ways you can have both those doctrines simultaneously true and operating if you allow God to operate in at least the equivalent of 3 dimensions of time and 9 dimensions of space. And all 3 of my solutions could be wrong. I'm just simply showing you that it's not a contradiction. Allow God to be as big as he is, and you can have your cake and eat it too. Same thing with the Trinity. You can have God being a single essence, and you have 3 distinct persons. That could work. As I just explained a few minutes ago, if you're trying to understand science, it doesn't work unless God is more than one person. And it doesn't work unless all those persons have the same attributes the same purposes, the same mind, the same essence. That's the doctrine of the Trinity, three persons and one essence.
Why does it have to be three person? One person?
With one person, you got no explanation for the origin of love. Love, by definition, requires a relationship between at least two persons. So if God is all by himself, that God cannot experience love or express love until he creates. He's forced to create in order to experience love. But the God of the Bible, being a triune being, is not compelled to create. Creation for the God of the Bible is a choice. It's not something that's compelled upon him. He already had everything before he created the universe, before he created us. There's nothing he really gains personally from what he creates.
There's a question in the back. We'll end with that.
I've been kind of deep wrestling with this one thing about Christianity and looking at different mythologies and stories, and how Christianity presents itself very much like many of the other cosmologies or mythological stories of different people and cultures and time in history. I do believe Christianity is distinct from these other ones and true for maybe some reason, but I also wanted to hear your reasons of why Christianity isn't just a myth of symbolism and metaphors that it's good for people to believe in and orient their lives towards in order to live prosperous and successful lives, or avoiding pain and whatnot, or dealing with pain in a good manner. So what might your reasons be to distinguish Christianity as the one true myth, let's say, rather than another one?
Well, the closest creation account that comes to what the Bible teaches about creation would be the Enuma Elish of the ancient Babylonians. And what I've done in navigating Genesis is to put the Enuma Elish side by side with what you see in the Genesis creation account. And there are similarities. But what you notice, and by the way, many non-Christian scholars really tout those similarities. What they don't communicate are the differences. The differences are far greater than the similarities. There's a few similarities, there's numerous differences, and the differences are dramatic. And so I think it's just helpful. Put the two side by side and see what it says. And one account is scientifically ridiculous, namely the Enuma Elish. There's no way you can integrate that with known science, but that's not the case with the Genesis creation account. It not only is a perfect mesh with the scientific record, it gets the chronology right. Everything's in the correct chronological sequence. That really impressed me when I started reading the Bible here in Canada many years ago, is saying, okay, I don't understand all the details of what it's saying here about the physical creation. But one thing was crystal clear. Everything is in the correct chronological sequence. There's no way Moses could have known that without supernatural help.
Thank you. So we're going to call it a meeting. If you're not on my email list, come and see me and give me your email so you can get a copy of this video of tonight. Thank you for coming.
No, I was like,